Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hyun Koo. I'm a partner at March Capital, where I lead our vertical AI strategy. And we were gathered here exactly a year ago, again, when it was raining very hard, with 4 founders in vertical AI markets, exploring why it's a great time to be building in various verticals. And I think it was sort of an understatement if you think about the number of emerging vertical AI companies that came out in the last 12 months, as well as the venture funding that went into these companies in the last 12 months. And this year, we hope to get to how to build a durable, winning vertical AI business. And with that, I'm excited to introduce 4 incredible entrepreneurs who are building in very different categories. So without further ado, maybe we just go around the table talking about, well, introducing yourselves. What problem are you specifically solving? And maybe highlight a few use cases with your platform. And Rami, maybe we start with you.
Sounds good. So, hi, I'm Rami. I'm the CEO of EvenUp. We're a Series D generative AI legal tech startup on a mission to level the playing field in personal injury law. For folks that don't know, personal injury ranges from motor vehicle accidents to child abuse cases across the US. And the big problem that we're solving is there's a really wide distribution in case outcomes today. So you could take 2 very similar cases, and one can settle for an order of magnitude apart from the other. And so we want to even up that distribution and ultimately give the 20 million Americans the justice that they deserve. Now, the way we're doing this is by working with personal injury attorneys for our customers and ultimately helping them across the life cycle of their case, acting as what I call the world's most experienced AI litigator, helping these folks make the best decisions along the life cycle of their cases, and ultimately doing the work of injury attorneys for them, like drafting letters, et cetera. So that's the quick overview on us. Series D, we're going through this period of hypergrowth, and we're only getting started in the space of generative AI.
And a big pain point for your customers being drafting demand letters, which you automate the entire process for.
That's right. So we work across a number of different domains and letters that we draft for injury attorneys, but what we're known for most is what's called a demand letter. Folks, to give you a better sense of what this is, to write one of these letters, it takes a couple of hours of reading medical records, medical bills, summarizing what happens in these cases, and coming up with a number of what these cases are worth. It's all in the shape of this letter. And so instead of an injury attorney writing that from scratch, we do it for them. We pull out all the inputs, summarize it in prose, write the letter on their behalf, and come up with a number for what their cases are worth.
Thank you. Mike?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Nally. I'm the CEO of Biomedicines. We're a company that uses machine learning to design novel protein therapeutics. We were founded in 2018, largely with a frustration that research productivity had been going down for 4 decades in a row. And in many respects within the drug industry, we started to believe a data-driven approach could lead to superior outcomes. The complexity of biology has largely overwhelmed the human imagination, and with the help of computers, we are starting to have an understanding of biology and proteins in particular, in our case, at a level that is truly going to generate a number of breakthrough therapeutics over the course of the next few years. And so we have, from those starting days in 2018, we now have a pipeline of about 20 different therapeutics that we're working on. Many of those are in partnership, so we work closely with colleagues at Amgen just up the road here. We work with Novartis, we work with MD Anderson Cancer Center and Roswell Park Cancer Center to leverage this underlying technology to solve molecular challenges. And I think as we look forward, these sort of approaches to biology are going to have a transformative impact on not only human health, but also domains like agriculture and sustainability. And it's a really, really exciting time to be in these sort of fields.
Can you talk about what the first couple of drugs might look like or be similar to that's in the current market?
Yeah, so our first, our lead program now is targeting asthma and COPD. The current standard of care for asthmatics is either inhalers or a monthly injection. Our lead program will take that monthly injection out to every 6 months. And if you think about that from an asthmatic patient's perspective or a COPD patient, what you really worry about is exacerbations that ultimately lead to hospitalization or even more severe consequences. Having an underlying level of protection for 6 months is almost like a vaccination against these sort of diseases. And so we think these sort of technologies can make a major difference in health outcomes for patients, and they're advancing really, really rapidly. This program in particular has the potential, we're targeting entering pivotal phase 3 trials starting in October. And so if you think about the historical drug discovery timelines, usually it's about a 15-year process from concept to approval. In this case, we're targeting about 8 years. And so we're already seeing about a reduction in half of the time, but also the cost is a fraction of what it was with historical standards.
Thank you. Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Bergin. I'm a co-founder of Higharc. We started our company in 2018. Right now, we're at our Series B stage, and we're focused on the home building market, developing technology and using artificial intelligence to build better homes and communities across the United States today. Built about 5,000 homes using our technology over the past 12 months, and our system is an end-to-end platform that connects the buyer, who can configure their home in 3D, like a video game, with all of its options and configurations. We automate the construction document sets that are used for permit. We automate the bill of material and the estimates for everything that needs to be purchased from that home, as well as the marketing assets that are needed. So we turn the home into a database. We use artificial intelligence to generate all the assets that are needed to bring that home from concept to completion.
Great, thank you. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm the founder and CEO of MarqVision. MarqVision is a legal tech company, a Series B legal tech company that builds IP operating system for what we call IP and brand professionals. We have 2 products. We have IP protection product, where we help companies take down infringements like counterfeits, digital piracy, deepfakes, and impersonations online. We also have IP management product, where we help companies file and renew their IP rights, like trademarks and copyrights, across 120 countries. And enterprise brands like Louis Vuitton, Tiffany, all the way down to smaller local brands here in LA, like Malvin Golf and Alo Yoga, use our product to protect and manage their IPs. And the problem that we're solving is that what we're seeing is a lot of these workflows around IP operations remain highly manual and fragmented. So we are building what we call IP agents to help these professionals do their work more efficiently.
Great, thank you. And it's interesting, Stripe released their annual letter, and one stat that popped out was AI native companies are getting to $5 million of ARR a lot quicker than cloud-based SaaS last generation companies, almost 33% faster. Rami, maybe to start with you, what's the what value proposition or sales motion stuck when you first started selling to personal injury lawyers?
For sure. When we started this business for around 5 years ago now, this was before generative AI or legal tech were all that interesting, and so there wasn't as much pent-up demand for generative AI. But the beauty of generative AI is, at least for us when we started, is we didn't actually have to sell them anything new. So that demand letter that I was chatting about earlier, this is a letter that every injury attorney has to write for virtually every case, and it's been written since before the internet. So when you go to a law firm and you show them our letter, they can quickly see, yes, this letter is better than the letter that I write in-house. It's also more affordable. And as a result, it was actually really easy to get these folks to buy. And another way, we're just doing an existing part of their work faster and ultimately better than they can do on their own, and in a way that just allows, I'd say, unlike traditional SaaS, a much higher sales velocity than you would typically see, because it is a genuine pain point that these folks have today.
And I know it was sort of publicly announced. Can you talk about what top-line number you reached in 5 short years? Or 5, 6?
Yeah, I would say since launching our SaaS product, we went from 0 to 50 million in about 3-ish years of ARR.
Congratulations. And Michael, going to you next. Home builders are generally not known to purchase software, and I'm sure there have been a lot of learnings since day one. What's the biggest challenge you faced when you started selling to this demographic?
Yeah, home builders, they sell a small fraction of 1% in terms of their spend for SaaS. If you look traditionally, over the last 20 and 30 years, that's where their systems have been developed. They have legacy ERPs that are on-prem, and our solution has been really transformational for them, but it required a mindset change and a real education process to bring them along the line. That meant meeting them where they are. They have purchasing managers, estimators, designers, and architects who are on staff. They have used the same tools for 20 and 30 years. So making our systems not a transformational leap in terms of the experience, but having the same look and feel as their traditional tools was really critical for us in unblocking them and getting to a point where they're spending 10x what they have been traditionally on software spend.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe touching a little bit on team building. AWS earlier on had a panel around building the right team to scale and win in certain markets. And Mike, this is especially true for you, where you sit sort of in the intersection of AI and computational and biosciences. How do you think about building the right team to win, or how do you attract talent, and how do you prioritize?
Well, it's probably been the single greatest challenge in building this company. When you actually think about the distinct tribes that we're bringing together, tribes that are not trained in the same ways. They speak different languages. So we work with computational scientists who kind of create the underlying machine learning models that drive our process. We work with PhD scientists who run the experiments that come out of those models. We work with clinicians who then develop drugs, and you can just think on that spectrum right there. Each of them are masters in these domains, but very few can actually span those three horizons. Similarly, as you go further and further, you get into manufacturing, you have engineers that are building the technology infrastructure for the company. And each of these are distinct cultures. And part of what we've had to do from the outset of building Generate is how do we break down those walls? We're fortunate that one of our founders actually is a polymath who basically sat in a number of these different camps. He is a mathematician, physicist, that was then received his PhD in computer science, chemistry, and biology. So, in many ways, he's a unicorn. And it's those sorts of unicorns that we're constantly trying to find who can, help us fill the gaps. Because I think a lot of the value in these sort of domains is actually created at these intersections. If you think about, how drug development has happened historically, it's been based on deep functional expertise and handoffs. Now, what we're trying to do is build a horizontal layer to accelerate the end-to-end drug discovery and development process, and that requires seamless interaction across these different domains.
That's great. Then, Mark, going to you, feels like we're shortchanging you by calling you sort of a vertical AI platform. I mean, you touch commerce, cybersecurity, and legal. Maybe asking you a similar question. How do you hire for that? It seems like a very, very tricky to hire the right people, addressing the right pain points. But also, you have a pretty big team overseas in Korea, and maybe talk about one, how do you hire for that, and two, whether it's an advantage to have a team overseas?
Yeah. So first of all, we have this saying inside our AI team that we can automate any work as long as we can write down in clear terms exactly how the work should be done, as if you're training a newly joined junior member in your team. And so what that means is oftentimes the constraining factor in automation is not with the technology itself, but rather having this precise understanding around the workflow and possessing the relevant domain expertise. So we spent a lot of years, in the first few years, trying to get the best these like domain experts who have been in the industry for more than 10 to 15 years, and yet have the agility to think about things from a more technological standpoint, and not trying to replicate what was done necessarily in the bigger companies. And for us, that means understanding how to file trademarks properly across all these countries in the world, how to properly structure and document these IP infringement reports that we need to submit to marketplaces, how to write demand letters so that we can send them to these sellers, infringing sellers, so on and so forth. And from a team building perspective, that means we have to bring together a group of domain experts, again, those people who have all these relevant experience, but also these product builders, the product engineers and the developers who have the technical capabilities to build these products and then have them work as one team. And having a team in Korea for us was pretty helpful for a few ways. But number one, in a very early phase of our company, nothing was automated. So we had to do a lot of these work manually ourselves. And having these people, really diligent, hardworking people in a low labor cost country definitely helped us. And also, one of the unique things about our market, IP law, is that IP law is one of the few laws in the world where there's not much variation from one country to another. So Japanese IP law almost exactly looks like American IP law, so which meant that we can actually hire these expensive experts in countries like Korea, and they will know the law for the entire world. And because we can basically pay them lower price compared to what we would pay them here, that has worked in our favor.
Yeah, and for those of you yesterday at the Mike Milken session, he talked about South Koreans being the hardest working immigrant group, so shout out to your team, Mark. And Rami, for you, what does founder market fit mean to you? I mean, you have two other co-founders. I was looking at your background. You don't really have much of a legal background. I think one of your co-founders does. And so maybe talk to us about, like, when people talk about founder market fit, what does that mean to you and how important that is into translating that into building a winning business?
Yeah, I would say it's it's super important, I think, especially in this world of generative AI and in a vertical domain. You have to understand the industry's pain points. And we're just chatting about this earlier today because we have our customer summit next week. You have to convince your audience that you know their practice better than they do for them to believe you, right? And in generative AI, especially in this world where you're doing distinct piece of legal work for these folks, you have to be very embedded into the vertical. For me, in my story, my co-founder story, I used to work at Waymo and I used to work at another mobility company where we saw a lot of claims as well. So I had exposure from the mobility angle. My co-founder is the attorney. He was working with insurance companies. He was on the receiving end of these demand letters and he had exposure there. And my third co-founder, Ray, his dad was unfortunately permanently disabled in a motor vehicle accident. And so this is where we all come from, again, the knowledge, and I think that really does resonate with the audience. And I would say, like, the one other point, I think it's different for different parts of AI, but in legal, accuracy and precision really matter. And AI can kind of look the same for a lot of different verticals, but 90% of the way there on a job description is okay. 90% of the way there on a demand letter is not okay. And so it goes back down to like founder fit. Being able to understand the problems deeply is going to be the reasons why you win in these vertical markets versus something more horizontal.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe quickly shifting gears to competition and vertical markets, both from other startups and incumbents. Mark, for your counterfeit use case, you're oftentimes selling to large enterprise brands like an LVMH, for example. And how do you establish trust with your customers, and how big of a challenge is it? You're selling to big brands, but you're a small startup saying, trust my brand to help protect your brand. So how do you establish trust with your customers?
Yeah. So the biggest competitors in our space are the BPOs, business process outsourcing companies. that each make hundreds of millions of dollars. They tend to hire thousands of people in countries like India and the Philippines to do the work that we do manually with human hands. And these companies have been around for a long time. The oldest company in this industry was founded in 1894, and the youngest company in this industry was founded in 1954. So it's a pretty old, legacy type industry. And the big advantage they have, of course, is around this distribution network, and they have this strong relationship with all the enterprise companies in the world. And so in the early days, what we found was a lot of the users that are using our product really loved MarqVision. They really wanted to use our product. But then the executives of the organization that those users work for tended to be strong champions of these BPO companies. So we had cases where our users wanted to renew the contract, but then the CFO wouldn't let it because they wanted to revert back to the BPO. However, what we found over time is that at the end of the day, companies are, I think, rational beings. And once your product is so good that it becomes clear that the BPOs are not catching up, then customers start to switch. And once that momentum begins, I think what typically happens is that these BPOs will try to fight back by lowering their prices, because that's one of the few levers they have at that point. And lowering the prices when you have laser thin margin and you have thousands of people working for you is probably a bad idea. So we have this bold prediction that in the next 5 years, a lot of these top 5 BPO companies will go out of business. And I don't think that's anything new, anything unique to our industry. I think we'll see similar stories in other industries where BPOs are kind of the dominant players and they don't adopt to this new technological wave.
Yeah, that's great. And Michael, similar question to you. You're oftentimes displacing one major incumbent, Autodesk, and I'm curious, how do you compete and win against them?
Yeah, I was at Autodesk and led the design research team there before we started Higharc in 2018. And I know the company well. They make a great product. But a good way to think about it is it's like Microsoft Word. It's a means to an end to get that final artifact, which are the construction documents. And when Higharc is deployed within the business, we take what is points and lines and information that's abstract, that when we look at it, we see a window or a door, and we turn it into data, the building as a database. And the value that we're able to extract out of that really changes the dynamics in terms of Higharc as a competitor to Autodesk. It ends up competing with 10 individual point solutions and a lot of manual labor, but delivers a magnitude of greater ROI.
Yes, sticking to the point of data, Rami, you you experience something a little bit different in which you have some smaller emerging startups that are starting to compete. And curious to get your take on, how do you create a data moat? And when we spoke earlier, you talked about data moats that matter. Maybe expand on that thought process on in which verticals, do data moats matter, and how do you use that as leverage to build a winning business?
For sure. And I can't speak for all industries, but for our industry, and it's really even in our name, EvenUp, it comes down to that distribution of case outcomes that I mentioned earlier. When you have 20 million claims that, again, could settle for an order of magnitude apart, it is obvious that the future means that distribution will narrow, right? You're not going to have such varied case outcomes. So one is there's a pretty wide gap today of performance, if you think about it that way in these cases. The other piece that makes the data moat valuable in my mind is, does that distribution matter to the customer? And so the thing about us in personal injury is we're selling to these injury attorneys that are all commission-based and make a percentage of the value of the case. So when you're selling to a fragmented, highly competitive, commission-only industry, and you're giving folks the ability to settle their cases faster for higher amounts, that's where every incremental basis point of accuracy really does matter and can set you apart from competition. I contrast that and to something like, let's just say there is, again, a tool that generates, just making stuff, I'm not picking on job descriptions for a second, but job descriptions, the difference between 90% of a job description and 99% to the HR lead potentially doesn't matter that much. Yep. Right? There's still a distribution of there's some good job descriptions, there's bad ones, but how much does that matter to the persona that you're actually working with? And then the last bit I'll say on this is, the thing about our space is the vast majority of these case outcomes are private, which is why there's such a big distribution to begin with. 99% of these cases settle outside of the legal system. It's kind of sitting in the inboxes of all of these different competitors. And so until you see that private data, that's when you can finally start solving these problems. And to the earlier question of ultimately, how does this make sense today? It's only because of generative AI can you actually start solving these problems, right? Before that, you couldn't really do this with traditional software because all of that data is text and language. So that's the quick overview you can think of. Big distribution, do the customers care about distribution? And then can you collectively collect that data? Is it private data that you can collect and nobody else can? And that's kind of where we sit.
Yeah, and Mike, what about in the biotech or therapeutics world? What role does data play? I mean, it's the foundation for what Generate was built on. So maybe talk about that, but also, is there a world where horizontal models can be as good as vertical models, maybe in your case, what Generate has built?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think, at its core, we started in the most data-rich regime that we could find in biology, right? One of the core questions at the founding of our company was, if you were to apply machine learning to biology, where would you start? And what we saw was proteins had two extraordinary data sets. They had both sequence data from the sequencing revolution and structural information. Now, if you're interested in therapeutics, there's a data set that's clearly missing. That's called function. Because you really don't, sequence and structure are intermediates, but what you care is how that protein performs in the relevant biological system. And so the core of our company was largely set up to create that third leg to the data stool and add functional data. We've been able to amass more probably protein functional data than any company on the planet over the last 7 years. And then what we've particularly done is we've actually gone toward specific edge data cases that are of highest value. One of the data gaps that we've seen is that while there's a lot of structural information in the public domain, this structural biology community created a database called the Protein Data Bank. These are usually freestanding protein structures. The data we really care about is actually protein-protein interaction data. And there's not a lot of structural information there. And so we have created a proprietary data set where we'll have more data than the public domain on those sort of protein-protein interaction data sets. And so for us, we are obsessed with data. We're obsessed with predictive and translatable data. The best kind of data that we are constantly searching for is what preclinical assays can generate data sets that are highly translatable into human systems. Because if we understand that, then we actually change the probability of success of drug discovery in a pretty material way. To your question on how broad can these models get, we're starting to see emergent properties in some of our models that are hard to explain. And these models seem to be picking up things that are beyond the core questions we're asking it around biological systems. Yep. And that's what's really encouraging, because the more these models start to generalize, the more, I think, value that can ultimately be unlocked. It's hard to say where that will go because we actually don't understand the underlying phenomena clearly. But we're seeing these very interesting byproducts, and we're also seeing some interesting biases that are into the models that we probably wouldn't have anticipated at the start. Like one of the major questions that we were being posed at the start of the company was, if you computationally generate proteins, will they elicit a negative response of the immune system? So will our immune systems recognize those as foreign proteins, not made by our human bodies, and therefore attack them? And that was an unanswerable question until you actually put these proteins into humans. What we're finding is that because we've trained on well-behaved proteins, these proteins are exceptionally well behaved
Yep.
and non-immunogenic. And so as we go down these paths, we're consistently learning about the quality and the breadth these models can potentially apply.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the really exciting things, because I think there's a lot of unintended observations that we're also starting to glean that actually make these things more powerful.
Yeah, that's great. Then maybe quickly switching gears to this concept of staying vertical and expanding, increasing penetration in a particular market, then going horizontal. Mark, maybe starting with you, we've been very impressed with your, the way you approach building products. First, you started with counterfeit product, and now going into impersonations and anti-deepfake piracy. And so, how do you think about product roadmap? What sort of signals do you see in the market that helps you dictate where to go? Because it is costly, and resources typically a constraint for a lot of startups. So, curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah. So a lot of the all of the product decisions that we make inside the company is really based on two things. First, we always, of course, want to listen to our customers and what other problems they are facing within the IP operations workflow. And to Hyun's point, we started out as a company that solves counterfeits problem, but we later learned that the same customer that has counterfeits problem with their merchandise product has some digital piracy issues on YouTube. So we went into the digital piracy market. And then later we learned that there are a lot of deepfake videos in YouTube. So we started to take those things down. And then most recently we saw that there is a rise of these impersonation websites and social media profiles that are trying to scam people. So, based on the recurring needs of our customers, we have been expanding the scope of services over time. So that's more of a, let's listen to the customers, let's get their feedback, more of a bottoms-up approach. And then we have another approach, which is more of a top-down approach, which is what other synergistic IP applications can we build, knowing that we have what we call system of record in place. And I think one of the big benefits of building this verticalized software is that you tend to become this system of record over time, because people like to kind of think of you as like a central repository of all the data that you need to run this application. So for us, that means we have all these trademarks and copyright information stored inside our system. We had all this information about the sellers, the product catalogs, and we also have the case management system to deal with IP infringements. So having that in place, what other things can we build? Maybe because we have this seller information, we can build something around IP licensing. Maybe because we have this trademark certificates, we can think about how do we help our customers come up with their new names, so IP search functionalities. So we use a combination of this bottoms-up approach and top-down approach to figure out what's our next opportunity and go from there.
And Michael, curious to get your thoughts on this topic. You mentioned your goal is to just stick with the home building vertical, and naturally the question that VCs typically is oh, how big is the market, right? How big is the TAM? What's your answer to that?
I mean, the TAM is very large. The residential construction industry in the United States alone is nearly $1 trillion annually. There's a huge opportunity there, but more to the point, I feel if you're going to go after automating a vertical, then you need to master the vertical before you then go horizontal. So our approach has been to attack single-family housing end-to-end and automate everything that's associated with it. Our strategy was to start in the simplest markets in terms of the homes, the home price, entry-level homes, and with a simple regulatory environment. So we're able to do that first in the southeast of the United States, now moving into the more complex metropolitan areas, and into the Bay Area, the most complex regulatory environment, place to build in the United States. So I think there's an opportunity for us in the very near term, expanding into townhomes, multi-unit residential, and mixed use. A lot of demand from the Higharc technology from the world's largest architecture and engineering firms, because we have capabilities that no other vertical has.
Yeah, and Mike, to you, I'm curious to get your take on you're building a massive platform that could be applied to drug discovery and other discoveries outside of drugs. And so curious how you're approaching the decision of maybe first tackling drug discovery and maybe something else, or like what goes through your mind as a CEO?
Yeah, so I mean, we started with our initial focus of antibody therapeutics. It was the largest fraction of the drug market, and the technology was particularly applicable to that domain. What we've done is actually use partners to push the technologies to other domains. So our work with Amgen, we work across 4 other modalities. So we work in enzymes, we work in peptides, work in bispecifics. We have work going on in cell therapy with our partner Roswell Park. We're in T-cell engagers with our partner MD Anderson. So we use partners to actually subsidize our work to expand the utility of the platform to other domains. I think the long-term question that I'm fascinated by, and I don't know if we know the answer to yet, is right now, value is transacted in the biopharmaceutical world on a product basis. So if I take a drug and I get it to human proof of concept, those drugs are transacting at about $1 billion plus fee. Some were up to $10 billion, and depending upon how far you take it, even toward commercialization. As these technologies get proven and they show better predictability, there should be a software angle to this where you actually sell into drug companies in a fundamentally different way. Right now, the drug companies are enormously resistant to having paying reasonably fair value for this software. And so I think over time, as these technologies prove themselves, the opportunity to actually fundamentally change the business model and actually fully take advantage of the platform may go down different paths. And I think we'll have to wait and see. Having spent 18 years at Merck, I think that's a really hard transition, just given the cultural dynamics in those big companies. But it would actually probably be the greatest answer for society to have fewer of these platforms that fuel the next innovative wave.
Yeah, maybe double click on that. So Merck, unlimited, very cheap capital. It seems like they could hire very good talent that you were talking about earlier on in the panel to do something similar. So like, why are they not capable of building what you're?
I mean, this was the fundamental question I kept asking myself while I was at Merck was, if I was the world's leading machine learning scientist in biology, would I be willing to go to Merck? And the reality of it is you can become a chief technology officer of one of these AI, ML biotech startups, or you can become a junior manager in a large corporate bureaucracy. And the reality was the top talent wasn't going to those places. When we started Generate in 2018, there were 90 people trained at the intersection of machine learning and biology in the world. We knew all 90 by name, and the competition wasn't large pharma. It was tech. It was Google, it was Microsoft, it was Amazon, NVIDIA. That's where these folks were congregating. And so we recognized that we had to change the underlying value proposition. And there's a cultural hierarchy in these sort of large pharmaceutical companies. It is an apprenticeship craft, drug discovery and development. And so to come out and have a 25-year-old making the same amount as a 30-year-old veteran, the compensation systems don't support that. And I think this is where, again, there's a cultural overhaul that's going to be required to fully embrace these sort of technological shifts. And I think that's one of the things that I think gives insurgents in these sort of spaces a huge amount of opportunity, because the cultural change, the talent change, and also the systems change that would be required within a big company require a lot of fortitude. And they don't feel like they can have that luxury, especially when you're managing to the quarter.
That's great. Rami, I want to go to you next. I'm curious if there are any innovations or developments in AI. I mean, I feel like the big theme around this year's summit is agentic AI and, of course, models. And what excites you most about AI or innovations that are taking place that could directly, in a good way, impact EvenUp?
Yeah, it's a good question. For us, just going back down to that to that data piece that I was talking about earlier, the fact that you can alter the trajectory of how personal injury is done is a very exciting thing that would have been unfathomable a couple of years ago, right? Just another example, like with some of our clients, they're now closing their cases, many, many months before they otherwise would have. And so if you think of, we work with about 2,000 cases a week. If we can cut that time by 6 months on average, you're talking about saving 1,000 years of time in a case every single week. Crazy stuff you would never really see in traditional SaaS, but it is because of this, kind of where we are with generative AI, where you can overlook these cases in real time and ultimately perform the work of a human at what we call superhuman quality, where we have, call it the collective wisdom of the hundreds of thousands of cases that we've seen to really be able to change that. I think the world of voice is also pretty interesting, and it's one of those things where if you think about how you settle these injury cases, there's a lot of rich information in documents. So that's where we started: medical bills, medical records, police reports. But this new source of information is actually voice. Learning from the clients themselves, folks that have been injured, and in terms of understanding how this has impacted their lives and how that can actually inform how we manage these cases.
Yeah. That's great. And maybe a quick one going down the list, starting with you, Mark. Maybe talk about a vertical that isn't yours that you're most excited about, where Gen AI can be most impactful or applicable, or I guess in a different life. Would you have built in a different vertical?
Yeah, interesting. That's not a question I thought about. Well, first of all, I think, although we're serving a lot of these IP and brand professionals, these people can really work in different industries, right? So most of the people that we're serving today are working for brands. But one of the things that we really want to do is to go after these law firms and these platforms where they also have a lot of IP and brand professionals. They're in a different vertical, but still we're serving the same type of customers. Quite frankly, I haven't thought about anything else other than that. I think, obviously there's a lot of efficiency gains that I hear about in these call centers. I think we had a few pitches about automating the call centers and, getting from 500 employees to 5 employees just using AI, and I think that's very interesting.
Michael?
Yeah, the opportunities right now in generative AI they're just amazing. And every few weeks, it's compounding and it's another step change. It's hard to keep up. Code generation is transformative. I can do more right now in the next week than I could have done in 3 months, going back 6 months ago. And it's just wonderful. There's never been a better time to be in the development world and be close to the metal. I love also video generation technology. I have 4 kids, and we're making movies. And we just sit down on the weekends, and we come up with some prompts, we string them together in Runway, and it's transformational. It's democratizing so much of what used to be just a guarded wall, world just for experts. And it's exciting to see that happening both in our vertical and across many industries.
Mike?
I'd love to take on sustainability. I mean, if you think about what we do, we manipulate proteins. Enzymes are proteins. Think about new enzymes to degrade plastics. Think about the enzyme Rubisco, which drives photosynthesis. What if we had a more efficient enzyme in that sort of a process? Those sort of domains, I think, for planetary health would be truly transformative, and the technologies exist to do some pretty extraordinary things in those domains.
Great. Rami?
I would say for me that this is more of just a pain point that we have in our industry, but surprisingly, a lot of our customers are still on-prem, and they're using legacy systems, and ultimately for us, getting that information is really key. And I've heard this from other vertical SaaS domains as well. There's a lot of rich data that's really hard to access because it's on-prem or in different sources that are not, you can't just plug into an API and pull that information. If there was a way that we could make that process easier of just getting the entire docket of information from, again, these folks in more traditional industries, I think that could really accelerate the flywheel in terms of what we can do with generative AI.
Well, that wraps it up for today. Thank you for joining us on a rainy day, and please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.